Lina was known across her small village as the lazy girl. She had a knack for avoiding chores, and whenever there was work to be done, you'd always find her lounging under the shade of the nearest oak tree, munching on an apple, or watching the clouds drift by. The other villagers would mutter, shaking their heads as they saw her. "Lina, you'll stay lazy your whole life if you keep this up," the baker once scolded, carrying trays of steaming bread. "Who will marry a girl who won't even knead dough?" But Lina, oh, she just smiled. It wasn't as though she minded what people thought. She had her reasons, you see. One particularly hot summer, disaster struck. The well in the center of the village ran dry. Without water, the crops would shrivel, the animals would weaken, and the villagers would suffer. They needed a solution quickly, but digging a new well required a massive effort. The townsfolk gathered, forming a plan. Everyone would need to pitch in. Men, women, yes, even children. There was no room for slacking. So, when Lina sauntered over to the group meeting, late as always, the grocer didn't hesitate to call her out. "Well, look who finally showed up. Let me guess, you're here to hold a shovel for 5 seconds, and then nap under that tree?" Everyone laughed, because frankly, that was exactly what they expected from Lina. But instead of rolling her eyes or staying quiet, Lina spoke up. "You know," she started, sweeping a hand through her hair, "there are 2 ways to get things done. You could spend hours sweating under the sun, or you could take a moment to think and find a smarter way." "Smarter way," the blacksmith sneered. "Sounds like someone trying to dodge work." Lina just smiled that sly, knowing smile, then walked away without another word. Most people shook their heads and went back to dividing tasks for the project. But Lina, she disappeared. That whole first day, when everyone else was digging away at the earth, Lina was nowhere to be seen. Then the second day went by, then the third. By the fourth, the villagers were exhausted, and still there was no sign of a new well. Then, just as people started to grumble about Lina's absence again, she returned, but not empty-handed. She came with a scroll. "What in the world is that?" asked the carpenter, wiping sweat from his brow. "It's a map," Lina replied coolly. She spread it across the table where the village leaders sat. "I remember old farmer Theo talking about a spring that used to run on the North Hill. Turns out, it's still there. I borrowed this map from the library in town. It shows the underground streams no one remembers anymore. If we dig here instead," she pointed to the spot on the map, "we'll strike water much faster." The villagers were skeptical, of course. But they were desperate, so they followed her suggestion. And guess what? By the end of that afternoon, water came gushing from the earth, like a miracle. Cheers erupted. Buckets flew into the stream, catching the precious water. Lina, sitting nearby with that familiar apple in hand, watched it all with satisfaction. The grocer approached her, a sheepish grin on his face. "All right, Lina, maybe you aren't just lazy after all. Maybe you're, I don't know, clever." "Clever? Sure," Lina said with a wink, "but I still wouldn't say no to a nap under the oak tree." From that day on, the villagers still joked about Lina's love for lounging, but they spoke of her cleverness with admiration. It turns out, being lazy can sometimes just mean finding a better way to solve a hard problem, and Lina had mastered that better than anyone else. And as for Lina, well, she kept living life on her own terms, with one motto firmly in her heart: why work harder when you can think smarter?